I was pulling weeds from the front bed when my daughter called. Not texted, called, which should have been my first warning, because Melissa only calls when she wants something she can't ask in writing. I let it ring twice. I had dirt on my hands and a kink in my lower back that had been bothering me since Tuesday, and I genuinely considered letting it go to voicemail. But I wiped my hands on my jeans and answered, because she's my daughter and I'm her mother, and some habits don't break even when they probably should. Mom. Her voice had that particular brightness to it, the kind she uses when she's already made a decision, and she's calling to inform me, not discuss. I know that voice the way I know the sound of rain before it actually hits the window. I have the most exciting news. I sat back on my heels. Tell me! Rowan and I are moving back. I didn't say anything right away. I looked at the marigolds I'd just planted along the border. Orange and yellow, the cheerful kind. I'd put them in myself, all 42 of them, 3 days after my husband passed. That was 4 years ago. I planted them because the garden books say marigolds keep away pests, and I needed to feel like I was keeping something away. Moving back, I repeated. To Harwick. We found a place we love, Mom. It's this old Craftsman on Delancey Street. You'd absolutely love it. But here's the thing. And there it was, the pivot. The sentence that always follows, here's the thing in Melissa's vocabulary. A request dressed up as a logistics problem. Closing isn't until the end of October, and our lease in Portland ends September 1st. So we were thinking, could we just stay with you for those 2 months? Just until closing. 2 months. September and October. Just until closing. I should have asked more questions right then. I should have asked what just until closing meant in precise calendar terms and whether we meant her and Rowan or her and Rowan and something else I hadn't been told about yet. But I said yes because she was my daughter and it was 2 months and I had the space and I thought I knew what I was agreeing to. I did not know what I was agreeing to. Let me tell you a little about my house because the house matters. I've lived here for 31 years. My late husband and I bought it together in 1994 when the neighborhood was still considered a gamble and the back porch needed to be completely rebuilt. We rebuilt it ourselves and sent over 2 summers with help from the couple next door and a library book on deck construction. The house is a 4-bedroom colonial on just under an acre with a detached garage and a separate studio space off that. A room I built out about 10 years ago when I decided, at 54, that I wanted to learn to paint. I'm not a great painter, but the studio is mine, and it has north-facing windows that give the most beautiful steady light in the afternoon, and I have spent some of the quietest and most clarifying hours of my life in that room. After my husband died, my son suggested I think about downsizing. He's practical, my son. He lives in Phoenix and calls every Sunday and means well in the way that people mean well when they've decided what's best for you. I told him I wasn't interested in downsizing. I told him that a house isn't just square footage and that the garden alone was worth more to me than anything I'd find in one of those 55 and over communities with the shuffleboard and the organized social calendar. He dropped it. He's good at dropping things when he sees I've made up my mind. Melissa is not good at dropping things. They arrived on September 3rd. I'd made up the guest room, bought extra coffee, stocked the refrigerator. I was genuinely happy to see my daughter. I want to be clear about that. Whatever happened after, I was happy in those first days. Melissa is good company when she's in a good mood, and Rowan, her husband of 6 years, a project manager for a construction firm, was pleasant and quiet and remembered to put his dishes directly in the dishwasher. It was fine for about 3 weeks. The first thing I noticed was the boxes. They'd brought more than 2 months' worth of boxes, not just clothes and toiletries. Furniture, kitchen equipment, art prints in bubble wrap, a standing lamp I'd never seen before. I mentioned this, mildly, and Melissa said they'd put everything in the garage to keep it out of the way. The garage that I use. The garage where I keep my car and my garden tools and the pressure washer I borrow out to the neighbors. The garage that was within 10 days, so packed with their things that I had to park in the driveway and ask Rowan to move 3 boxes before I could get to my own lawnmower. I said something about that too. Melissa said they'd reorganize soon, They did not reorganize soon. The second thing I noticed was the studio. I'd mentioned the studio when they arrived. Mentioned it the way you mention something when you're setting a gentle boundary, which is to say not firmly enough. I said, "That's my painting space. I'm in there most afternoons." Melissa had said, "Of course, Mom, we won't bother you." About 5 weeks in, I went out to paint on a Thursday afternoon and found Rowan's drafting table set up against my north wall. His laptop, his blueprints, his coffee mug. He'd arranged it neatly, which somehow made it worse. Like he'd been planning it long enough to think about neatness. I stood in the doorway of my own studio, and I counted to 10 the way I used to when the children were small, and I was trying not to say something I'd regret. Then I walked back inside, and I made a cup of tea, and I sat down at my kitchen table, and I thought, very carefully, about what was happening. Here is what I understood by then. Melissa and Rowan were not unhappy in Portland. They had not moved back to Harwick because of the Craftsman on Delancey Street. The Craftsman on Delancey Street was real. I'd looked it up, I'd seen the listing, but I had a feeling, a quiet and growing feeling, that it was more aspirational than imminent. There had been no closing date mentioned recently. There had been no talk of the mortgage paperwork, no conversations about the inspection. When I asked, Melissa changed the subject with the fluid ease of someone who has practiced changing subjects. I started paying attention to different things. I noticed that they'd stopped eating separately. For the first few weeks, Melissa had offered to cook dinner 2 or 3 nights a week, which I'd appreciated. Then, it became assumed that I was cooking for 3. I didn't point this out immediately because I'm the kind of person who doesn't point things out immediately, which is both a virtue and a significant personal flaw that has cost me more peace of mind than I care to calculate. I noticed that Rowan was working from the studio full-time now. Not dropping in, full-time. I'd been quietly displaced from my own creative space, and it had happened so gradually that I hadn't seen it coming until it was already done. I noticed that Melissa had started referring to the house in the first-person plural. Our house, our driveway. We should repaint the shutters. Not asked, observed. Like a fact about a shared property. The closing date on the Craftsman came and went in October. I know it came and went because I marked it on my calendar, and I watched for any sign that they were packing up. There was no sign. When I finally asked, directly, Melissa said there had been some complications with financing. She said it was just a little longer. She said, "Mom, you don't want us to rush into something just to get out of your hair, do you?" She said it in a way that made me feel unreasonable for having asked. It was the first week of November when my neighbor Phyllis came over for coffee. Phyllis has lived next door for 22 years and knows this property nearly as well as I do. She was the one who helped me stay upright at my husband's funeral, who brought food for 2 weeks after, who never once said the wrong thing. She sat at my kitchen table, and she told me what she'd heard. Rowan had mentioned to her husband, casually, just in conversation, that they were settling into the place and that it was working out great and that they were thinking long-term. Long-term. Phyllis looked at me carefully across the table. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. I thanked her for the coffee. She thanked me for the coffee. We both understood what had just happened. I did not go to Melissa that night. I am not someone who confronts in the heat of the moment, and I knew that if I walked into that living room while Rowan's architecture podcasts were playing and my daughter was scrolling her phone on my couch, I would say things in the wrong order and none of it would land correctly. Instead, I drove to see my attorney. His name is Gerald Fitch. I've known him for 25 years. He handled my husband's estate, my mother's probate, the easement dispute with the property line when the neighbors before Phyllis tried to claim 2 feet of my yard as theirs. Gerald is the kind of lawyer who doesn't waste words and doesn't alarm you unnecessarily. And when I sat across from his desk and told him the situation, he listened without interrupting, and then he said, very quietly, "All right, let's look at what you've got." What I had was my name alone on the deed. What I had was a house that had never been put in anyone else's name, because after my husband's death I had updated the estate planning and made certain that the property, should I pass, would go to my 2 children equally. But it was mine, entirely mine, until that happened. Gerald explained a few things to me. He explained that in our state, if someone lives in a property for long enough and can demonstrate they've been contributing to the household, paying utilities, making repairs, that kind of thing, they might try to make certain arguments. He wasn't saying they had a case. He wasn't saying I should not wait. He also suggested I document everything. The original 2-month agreement, the extension, the studio, the garage, the offhanded comments about the future. I'm a thorough person. I had most of it. I drove home in the dark and I sat in my car in the driveway because I still couldn't get into my garage. And I looked at the house with the lights on inside and I thought about 31 years. I thought about the porch my husband and I built with a library book and the help of neighbors. I thought about the studio with the north-facing windows. I thought about 42 marigolds along the front bed. Then I went inside and I was perfectly pleasant at dinner. 3 days later, Melissa asked me to add Rowan's name to the utility accounts. She framed it as practicality. It's just easier, Mom, in case there's an outage or something and they need to speak to the account holder. Rowan's home during the day, it makes sense. I said I'd think about it. The following week, she brought it up again. This time, she'd added a reason. Also, some of these subscription services won't let you add a secondary user unless you're on the account. It's just an administrative thing. The week after that, she sat down at the kitchen table with a look I recognized from her childhood, the look of someone who has built a careful argument and wants to deliver it before they lose their nerve. Mom, she said, Rowan and I have been talking, and we want to be more real partners in this household, not just guests. We want to contribute properly. And part of that is being recognized officially as part of the household. So we were thinking, and please just hear us out. We were thinking about whether you'd be open to adding us to the deed. Just so we're all protected. Just so it feels like home. I looked at my daughter. She is 53 years old. She has my husband's eyes and my mother's stubbornness, and I have loved her, imperfectly, but without reservation, for every single year of her life. And I looked at her across my kitchen table in the house I have lived in for 31 years, in the house where I raised her, and I felt something settle in me as the particular quiet of absolute clarity. Let me think about it, I said. I was not going to think about it, but I needed her not to know that yet. I called Gerald that same afternoon. I told him what they'd asked. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you want to handle this formally or informally?" I said formally. He said, "Then I'll draw up a notice. In our state, when someone has been residing in your property beyond an agreed period without a formal rental agreement, you can issue them written notice." Gerald prepared a notice to vacate. 30 days. Legal, clear, specific. My name at the top, the address of the property, the date by which they were required to leave. He also prepared something else. Because I had mentioned in our first meeting that I'd been thinking for some time about formalizing my estate planning beyond the basic will I'd updated after my husband died. I wanted a trust, a revocable living trust, with the house as the primary asset, with my grandchildren. My son's 3 kids, who call me Grandma Bette and who I see every Christmas, as the eventual beneficiaries, alongside Historical Preservation Society that has been restoring the old mill district 3 blocks from my house. Gerald had the trust drawn up. I signed both documents on the same afternoon at the small conference table in his office, with his assistant as witness. I did not tell Melissa I was going to see Gerald. I did not tell anyone. I drove myself, parked on the street, and walked back to my car afterward with both documents in a folder under my arm. On the way home, I stopped at the nursery and bought 6 winterberry holly shrubs for the back corner of the yard. Bright red berries all winter. The birds love them. I planted them myself that evening after dinner while Melissa and Rowan watched television in my living room. I gave Melissa the notice to vacate on a Saturday morning. I waited until after breakfast, when Rowan had gone to the garage to look for something. I wanted to speak to my daughter first, before the 2 of them could confer. I sat down across from her with the envelope and I said, "There's something I need to give you, and I want you to know that this was not easy for me. and that it doesn't change how much I love you." She looked at the envelope with the particular expression of someone who has been half expecting something and is still shocked when it arrives. "What is this?" "It's a notice. 30 days. Gerald Fitch prepared it. "It's all legal and it's all correct." She didn't open it right away. She set it on the table, and she looked at me and she said, "Mom, are you serious?" "I am very serious," I said. "Because of the deed thing? We were just talking." "We weren't." "Mom, we're your family. You're kicking out your own family." "I'm not kicking out my family," I said. "I'm asking my family to do what they agreed to do in September, which was stay for 2 months. The closing fell through. You know that." "I know that's what you told me, and I'm sorry if that's true. But Melissa, you've been here since September. It's November. Rowan is working out of my studio full-time. I can't get to my own garage. You asked me last week to put you on the deed to my house." I kept my voice level. "It wasn't easy. I'm not angry with you, but I have to protect myself." She pushed the envelope back toward me. "I'm not accepting this." "You don't have to accept it," I said calmly. "It's been served. Gerald will advise you on your options." She went to find Rowan. I went to the studio. I had to move his drafting table 3 inches to access my easel, and I painted for 2 hours. I painted badly, the way you do when your hands won't quite cooperate. But I was in there, in my own room with my north-facing windows, with the light that never quite looks the same twice. There was a difficult week. Melissa called my son in Phoenix. I know this because he called me the same evening, careful and measured in the way he always is, and said, "Mom, Melissa says things are tense. Do you want to tell me what's happening?" I told him exactly what had happened, from the beginning. The 2 months, the 6 weeks, the studio, the garage, the deed. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What do you need from me?" "Nothing right now," I said. "I just need you to know." He said he understood. He didn't call Melissa and tell her to stay. I know this because Melissa told me, with some bitterness, that her brother had sided with Mom, which was not quite the right way to describe what he'd done, but I understood why she saw it that way. There were a few conversations I'd rather not reconstruct in detail. Melissa cried, twice. Rowan said very little, which was consistent with how he'd been since September. My daughter told me I was choosing the house over her. I told her I was choosing myself, which was not the same thing. She said that when she was older and her children were treating her this way, she'd remember this. I said that I hoped she would remember all of it, the whole of it, not just the ending. That was the hardest thing I said. It was also the truest. They were out by the 42nd day, 2 past the 30-day notice, which Gerald had told me to expect, and which I'd decided not to fight if they were clearly making progress. I watched the moving truck from the front window. I was not gloating. I was not relieved, exactly. I was something more complicated than either of those things. I was sad in the specific way you are sad when something you hoped wouldn't happen has happened, and when the only comfort is that you handled it correctly. Melissa hugged me on the front step. She was brief about it. She said, "I don't understand you, Mom," I said. "I know. I hope someday you will." She got in the car and Rowan drove them away. They were going to stay with a friend in Harwick while they figured out their next step. I didn't ask about the craftsman on Delancey Street. I already knew it had never been under contract. I walked back inside and I stood in the middle of my living room and I listened. The house was mine again. Quiet in the particular way it's been quiet since my husband died. Not empty, just still. There's a difference. Empty has a hollowness to it. Still is just peace waiting for you to settle into it. I went out to the studio. Rowan had left it cleaner than I expected. He'd taken his drafting table and his blueprints and his coffee mug. The north wall was clear. The afternoon light came in the way it always does. That long, even gray gold that you only get in November, which is not everyone's favorite light, but has always been mine. I set up my canvas. I painted for 3 hours. A decent painting, this time. The winterberry hollies from the back corner, in that same November light. Not a great painting. I'm still not a great painter, but it was mine, made in my room, in my house. Gerald sent me a copy of the finalized trust documents the following week. I put them in the fireproof file box I keep in the hall closet. the same box that has my husband's death certificate and my mother's recipe for apple cake and the deed to this property that has had my name on it for 31 years. My son called that Sunday, as he always does. He asked how I was. I told him I was well. I told him the winterberry hollies were in, and that the birds had already found them. He told me about the kids. His youngest had lost his first tooth. His middle one had made the school play. Normal things. Good things. Before we hung up, he said, "Mom, you did the right thing." I said, "I know." I didn't say it with triumph. I said it the way you say things when they're just true. Plain and finished, and not requiring anything else from you. I have not spoken to Melissa in 6 weeks. I have written her 2 letters, which she has not answered. I am not chasing her. I'm not sure I'm capable of chasing her, not because I don't love her, but because I spent 30 years being the person who absorbed the inconveniences of other people's choices. And I understand now at 67, you can hold someone without absorbing everything as holding. I held Melissa. I held Melissa when she was small. I held her when her first marriage ended. I held her when she called from Portland at 2 in the morning. Twice, for reasons she never fully explained. I'm still holding her. I'm just not handing over my house to do it. The marigolds are gone for the season, pulled up before the frost. Come spring, I'll put in 42 more. I've been doing it every year since my husband died. Some things you keep doing, not because they're necessary, but because they mean something that doesn't need to be explained to anyone else. Not your son, not your attorney, not even the daughter who drove away in a moving truck and hasn't written back yet. I keep the north-facing windows clean. The light is better when you don't let things collect on the glass.